Catherine Nolan, who was,
Sister John David Nolan.
and we were just laughing about your name.
Yes, yes.
Can you briefly just tell us that little incident?
Oh, it's my father's name.
Yeah.
And I went to, I believe it was 65 before we had changed into secular garb, and I had an academic year at an NSF grant at the University of Notre Dame. And so I checked into the residence hall, and I was Sister John David Nolan. And I got a card from the ROTC, and it was addressed to John David Nolan Sr. They put the SR on the end. And they wanted to know if I wanted to join the ROTC, and would I like an officer to call on me. And I said I was very tempted to check yes and see what happened when he walked in, and here I was all in my white Dominican habit.
A little bit of mischief inside you. Delightful, delightful story. Well, thank you for coming to tell your story, because you're the only one that can tell your story. And maybe we could begin with, where do you come from, your parents, what part of the country, briefly, your background.
All right. I grew up really in two different cultures. My mother is from a very old French-Canadian family, and my father is Irish, from Chicago. So I used to, we lived in Chicago, but spent summers on the farm in Minnesota, in southwestern Minnesota. My grandparents, my mother's family, were part of the French-Canadian group that had settled in Acadia, like the Evangeline story, and they were deported to Massachusetts. They then, after they were able in the 18th century, when 1741 or something, they were able to go back to Canada, and they went to Three Rivers. And then from there, they immigrated when the land opened up under the Homestead Act to Bourbonnais, Illinois, because they were farmers. And from Bourbonnais, Illinois, when the railroads had been built out to Minnesota. And so they went out to southwestern Minnesota and bought their land from the railroads. And my grandfather's farm was out there. And all my aunts and uncles and cousins all were on the farm. So I had that experience of being on the farm, an old-fashioned farm, really. There was no electricity or running water or central heat. But they had wonderfully coped with all of this with their kerosene lamps and so on. So that was one experience that I did have. And then the other experience, of course, was growing up in Chicago in the South Side, and my father was South Side Irish. My grandmother was right from Ireland, from Waterford, Ireland. And she told me wonderful stories about growing up in Ireland. So,
have you been to Ireland?
I have been to Ireland. Yes, I have been to Ireland.
Good, okay.
And my grandmother grew up in Waterford.
Mm-hmm. And what was your role in the family? Where did you come? Your siblings?
Yes, I had one older brother who was about 18 months older than I, about a year and a half older. And I was the second oldest, and the oldest daughter. Then I have one brother who's 4 years younger, Joe. And then I have a brother and sister who are twins, and they're 9 years younger.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
So I took care of them a lot. They were born in 1942, and those were the war years, as we all remember. All of us of a certain age can remember. And my mother was very, very busy, and my father was working 2 jobs, and I took care of those babies a lot.
So you're telling us a lot about your family values.
Yeah.
Yes.
They think my youngest brother and sister kind of look at me like their second mother.
Nice. And what are their names?
Judith Ann, and James Anthony.
And James Anthony. And your oldest brother's name is?
John David.
John David.
Yeah.
Got it.
Same as my father.
Okay. And that's who you are. So you're named after your father and your brother.
Yes, in my religious life I was.
Your religious life. Now you're back to Mary Catherine Nolan.
That's right.
Where'd you go to school?
Oh,
How were the school years for you?
I did very well in school. My mother was a teacher, actually. And so before I even went to school, I never went to kindergarten. But before I went to school, my mother used to read to me a lot. I think I learned to read before I went to first grade, just from looking at the books and hearing her. My father read to us, too. It was sort of an evening ritual that we would sit
That is nice.
and be read to. So I went to first grade. I went to grade school at St. Felicitas in Chicago, south side of Chicago. And my teachers were wonderful. They were IHM sisters. And then I went to Aquinas High School. And this is an interesting story because my mother's great aunt was a Mercy sister, Mother Genevieve Granger. And she had been one of the foundresses of St. Xavier's College. So this is how my mother got to Chicago, because she went to St. Xavier's College. And when I told my mother I was interested in religious life, when I graduated from grade school, my mother wanted me to go to Mercy High School. And I wanted to go to Aquinas because my friends were going to Aquinas. And my mother and I were, arguing about this. And I went up to my room and I knelt by my bed, and my 8th grade religion book was on my bed, and it was a church history. And I just opened it up at random, and there was a picture of Albertus Magnus. Big picture of him. And he was sitting there in his Dominican habit. And I said, St. Albert, I want to go to the Dominican Sisters at Aquinas. And help me out. And my mother came to the foot of the staircase, called up and said, Mary, if you really want to go to Aquinas, all right, but you must keep up your grades. Because she thought Aquinas girls were social butterflies, and Mercy girls were serious students, and Loretta High School girls were ladies. So anyway, that's how I got to Aquinas.
And is that how you got to us?
Oh, that's how I got to us, yes, indeed.
Who were your teachers there?
Oh, I had wonderful teachers, wonderful, wonderful teachers. Every teacher I had was extremely good. And one of them is still here, and that's Sister Mary Bride.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, who were my teachers?
She was quite an inspiration for you.
She was.
At that
She
time.
assisted me.
Who was your sponsor?
She was.
Oh, nice.
She was,
Okay.
yeah. She was my math teacher. And Jane Ellen.
Yes.
What a lovely lady. I remember Sister Jane Ellen very well. Sister Alicia, biology. Let's see. Well, I just can't remember right now.
What years were you at Aquinas?
47 to 51.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
you entered in 51?
I entered in 51 right after I had graduated, as many of us did. I would have to say that it was a struggle at the end. I had made a retreat in my freshman year at Aquinas. And at the time, I seriously thought of wanting to commit my life to God. It was a very good retreat, as I recall. And I made a promise, I believe, that I would. But I thought, well, I don't need to do this yet. Now I can have fun, because I'm not going to enter until after I graduate. So I had a wonderful high school, party time. I went to all the parties.
Because once you entered, you wouldn't have any
That's
fun.
right. That's right. So I was thinking I have to have fun now. So, and I went to proms, and some of the boys' proms, Mount Carmel prom and St. Ignatius prom, and plus our proms. And anyway, I just had a very good time in high school. But I did do well enough, academically, so my parents were pleased. And then about the time of my birthday is in March, and I began to think seriously, well, now I'm going to graduate, and now is the time. I've got to decide what I'm going to do. And it was a real struggle, but I did say, well, I'll try it. So I entered in June, like many of us did. And there were, I think, 7 of us that came on the train from Chicago. We came on the train. And the first night, we had come in late, and it was kind of cold. And I remember being in the big dormitory with the curtains around the bed, and I didn't sleep very well at all. And thinking, oh, no, I don't want to do this. As soon as I have breakfast tomorrow, I'm going to leave. So the next morning, after Mass and breakfast, things were better. I thought I'd stay another day. And here I am, after 65 some years.
And you brought some fun and some mischief into the convent, it seems like.
Oh,
that's nice.
I have to say, I loved my formation time. And I really appreciated very much Sister Patrick Jerome
Right.
and her lectures. She was not our novice director for the first 7 months. Sister Edmund was my novice director.
Okay.
And then it was a change. You know, the older novitiate group made profession, and we became senior novices, and then Sister Patrick Jerome took over. And I always think that we belong to the crowd that trained the novice director.
You got her ready for us.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. So then you went through formation, and then you went to classes, intercession or whatever. Then what happened? Once you went through formation, where did you go first?
Okay, as a postulant, I went out to teach at St. Scholastica's as a postulant, and I did that until, December.
Right.
Sister Mary Ruth was my lovely, very kind to me. She was a superior. And then came in to make the novitiate. And right after novitiate, I went out again. And this time I went to Our Lady Gate of Heaven. And I replaced, the postulant was there, who was Maria Riley, I believe. And there was a little boy that used to carry her books home from school. And I took over her class, and he wasn't really sure that I was going to fill the bill. You know, I could tell, but he decided, okay, he'd been doing this. So he took my books, and he offered to carry my books home. And he had these beautiful big brown eyes. I still remember him very clearly, because many years later, I was picking up a priest who had come in from Mexico City, who was going to give a talk in the program I was teaching in Cincinnati. And as soon as he got off the plane, I picked him up at the airport. As soon as I got off the plane and I looked at him, I knew who he was, and it was the little boy that had carried home my books all those years before.
Isn't that something?
And he had become a priest, a Basilian, and he was in Mexico City.
It goes into that quote we heard on Sunday, or Ash Wednesday, I think I know you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You've been in many ministry, had a lot of ministry involvement.
Yes.
Can you think of perhaps, and I know sometimes that's very hard, what was your most favorite ministry that you have been involved in? We can't go through all of them, but if you could talk about maybe one of your favorites.
All right. Well, actually, there were a couple I think I need to mention. I had the opportunity, I had a wonderful opportunity to study in seminary. And I want to mention this first because I was teaching in Midland at Regina High School. It closed. I went into campus ministry and thought I needed a little more pastoral theology. My degree was science. And I wrote and asked if I could have a year to study pastoral theology. And the answer came back, no, I couldn't do it this year, but perhaps another time. And then 2 weeks later, I got a letter asking if I'd be interested in studying in seminary for 4 years with the intention of possibly being ordained.
What year was this?
this
Roundabout?
72, I think it was. Joan Delaplane and Mary Tardif had gone to seminary the year before. And so Annalise and myself then went the second year. And we went to St. Cyril, I said yes. And we went to St. Cyril and Methodius Seminary. And I would have to say, I just loved studying theology. I mean, I just ate it up. I just thought it was wonderful.
It's obvious.
But I also came up against the position of women in the church and the understanding of women that had been passed on in seminary education, that they weren't quite fully persons in their own right, you know. So I was surprised maybe at the amount of sexism in the church and how enduring it had been down through the centuries. And one of my plans at the time was to teach in a seminary because I felt they really needed the women. They needed women. They needed to understand women. And at one point, there was a very holy priest, who past rector of the seminary, very prayerful, and I thought maybe he'd make a good spiritual director. So I went to visit him, and he gave me lots and lots of sympathy. And he said, the terrible suffering that you are enduring, that has been imposed on you by your superiors, will be to your holiness if you just endure it for God's love. And I said, well, I'm not suffering. I'm really enjoying studying theology. And, you know, he just couldn't understand that. And I was telling one of the other seminarians, you know, that he thought I was suffering. And the seminarian said to me, well, he truly believes that women do not have the mental capacity to understand theology. And I thought, whoa, okay, that's what it is.
That's what it was. There's something else you're famous for. It's your work with Study Mary, Blessed Mother. Want to talk about that a bit?
Oh,
about your study there?
Yes, well, I would have to say that I have always loved Mary.
That you wrote a book?
Yes, well, what happened was that I did have then, let's see, I'm trying to think of where I went after seminary. I taught in a special program called An Active Spirituality for the Global Community, and it was based in Cincinnati. And I remember teaching a couple of years in that program. And then I worked for 6 years with the Franciscan Friars in their formation program. And at this time, I was still thinking that I want to teach in seminary. I think that the priests need to have the presence of women. And so I had the opportunity then to go to the International Marian Research Institute in Dayton, Ohio. And I went up there and I interviewed, and so they accepted me into the institute. And I had a lot of theology background because I had been through seminary. So I was able to complete the courses, very few that I had to take for a doctorate. But the requirement, of course, is the important thing is to do a dissertation. And you have to choose a topic that hasn't been done. So my brother, who at the time was teaching at University of Georgia, referred me to one of his colleagues who was doing qualitative research. And he said to me, you can do a different kind of research. Instead of taking your information from books, you can take your information from people, interview them. So I interviewed, I think it was 30 some of our sisters on the Magnificat. I was going to write my dissertation. But you have to write a dissertation on a topic that hasn't been done before. And there were a lot of writings on the Magnificat. But this was a different kind of research. It was qualitative. So I interviewed all of these sisters, and I worked with the materials as my brother's friend had directed me to do, and I wrote up my dissertation. And then I was invited by my director at University of Dayton, Father Bert Booby, to give a retreat to priests. So I gave a retreat to priests, and I had to have lectures it was a preached retreat. Mm-hmm. So I did the themes of the Magnificat. And then I got other invitations. I think I gave 7 retreats on the themes of the Magnificat. And someone said to me, put them in a book. Oh, so well, it took me a while to finally settle down and decide, but I did then ask for a little time off to write, and I went out to Colorado, I think. Sister Barb Stanek told me of a place out there at the Cistercian Monastery where they had a guest house, and I spent a month out in Colorado in the winter. It was in December. At the Cistercian Monastery there in their guest house, and wrote the book, put all the lectures together.
And what's the title of the book? The
title of the book is Mary's Song, Living Her Timeless Message. And Ave Maria Press published the book, and they did very, very well. They sent it out as one of the Book of the Month Club's books in hardcover. And then it has sold about 20,000 softcover books so far, so it did very well. Mm-hmm. They were pleased, the press was pleased. And I have to say they promoted it very well too. I was pleased.
And you have done a lot of preaching, lecturing, teaching, just shared the depths of who you are and what you're about. Tell me this, vacations. Do you like vacations? And
sure.
Where do you go? Where's your most favorite spot to go on vacation? Because that tells us something else about you.
Oh, I haven't thought about this, but what would be my favorite? Well, I have to say, this would not be vacation probably, but because I have a doctorate in Mariology, I belong to the Mariological Society, and we have an international Mariological Society, and I have been able to go to there every 4 years. They meet. So I have been able to, we met, at one point, we met in Lourdes.
Lourdes?
Yes, in Lourdes. And if I present a paper, then I get everything free. So I just had to do my transportation. So I had enjoyed very, very much, spending a couple of weeks in Lourdes. I stayed a little longer, and my niece, who speaks perfect French, came with me. So I enjoyed that very much, and then I enjoyed I did go to Ireland. We had a family reunion in Ireland. We had a wonderful, tour of Ireland. So I think going overseas for those international meetings, have been a very great joy. I've enjoyed that a lot.
Well, let me just say this to you. You seem to light up no matter what you're doing. You just seem to enjoy life and put some happiness into it. So your next international place that you're invited to, my ministry load is kind of low at this time. So if I could even help you and carry your suitcase or something, Nolan and O'Flynn could go and have a good time. So, Mary Catherine, there's, to try to fit your life into 30 minutes is a challenge.
It is a challenge, you're right.
It is a challenge, but you certainly have been gifted, and you've been very generous.
And I've been privileged. I've been privileged. Someone, that said to me one time, how come you're able to do these kinds of things? And I said, well, I asked. If you want to do something, ask.
That's right. Good lesson.
Yeah.
Because you can get yes or you can get no.
That's right. It's right. And you can give a reason for why you want to do it. And if it's a good reason, it could very well be yes.
Well, thank you again. So now you get back to cleaning that room. I know you're very busy
So
these
one
days.
more thing I want to say. I thought about this last night. The favorite place, I think you asked about the favorite place. My favorite place was when I lived in community with Bishop Ray Lucker in the Diocese of New Ulm and worked for the diocese. And the whole diocesan staff lived together in community at the pastoral center, and the bishop was wonderful to us. So that was a wonderful experience of community living. Mm-hmm. We prayed together, we ate together, and then we were all working for the diocese.
Thank you.
You're welcome.